Hi, and welcome. Today we're going to be covering the highlights from Chapter 5 on audience segmentation. This is one of my favorite parts in the campaign process. I'd say it's a close tie between this and actually testing messages to see how they affect people. But it's definitely, of course, next to choosing a topic, one of the most important steps, because if you don't know who your audience is, then it's really hard to evaluate what sort of message you should be sending, whether or not the message has been successful, and things like that, because everything is kind of based on you knowing your audience and who you're actually trying to persuade or nudge into adopting a particular behavior. Okay, I want to kind of like jump right into this. The bottom line is that you could have a very, very large audience in mind. So you could be thinking about, all school-age children need to exercise more, or something like that. But the problem with that, of course, is that each varying segment of that group. So we have maybe urban children versus rural children, or we have school-age children between the ages of 5 and 8, or between the ages of 12 and 16. I mean, what have you. Different racial groups, different socioeconomic statuses, right? You can, the list of demographics goes on and on. And in order to tailor a message that really hits everybody would be next to impossible. It also isn't very cost efficient, right? So it's impractical on many different levels. So the whole goal is for you to start thinking about a very specific, much more narrow audience, or possibly maybe one or two audiences to really target your social marketing campaign at. And your book goes into a couple of different steps that need to be followed in order to do this. First, of course, you should start with listing all of the potential audiences that you might be interested in targeting your message to. So sort of like my school children example, maybe you're interested in specific school districts, for instance, because they have a particular PE plan that differs from others, or maybe they consume more sugar, so they need to exercise more. I don't know. Your book gives a neat example, a great case study at the beginning of a Portland campaign to get people using more alternative transportation. And, again, you could theoretically target that to everybody in Portland, right? You want everybody to use alternative transportation, but here's the thing, some people already are, right? So some people already are, or maybe some people know about it, but they don't want to do it. So they're a little bit more of a harder sell. And they eventually, of course, end up focusing on new residents, because the logic goes that, well, here are people that are coming into the city and they might not even know about these different alternative transportation opportunities. So they might be a good audience to target specifically. We also know how to reach them, right? Because maybe they'll get, and I actually don't remember this, but if they got newcomer guides in the city, we could put our promotional materials in there. And of course, that audience has its own unique challenges too, because they're new to a city. Maybe they're not as comfortable with sort of like branching out into alternative transportation systems. But again, even the challenges that make that particular audience unique is important, because those are things that you might want to be addressing in your campaign too. And you can't, just as you can't address all of the needs of a particular audience, right? You can't always address all of the different challenges that they might need to be addressed too. Okay, so what are these steps that your book talks about? Well, the first one is, again, to try to think, brainstorm, try to imagine all the different types of segments you could potentially target your message to. So you can think about the population at large and then get smaller and smaller. Your book has a great list of different demographic and decision-making variables that you might want to consider. I think it was, let me see, table... Yeah. Table 5.1. You know how good I am at this. I don't expect you to read it, just so you know we're looking at the same thing. And for the record, all these different variables that they have on here, they have geographic variables that you might want to consider as far as your audience goes, like if people in a particular region, or demographic variables. Some I've already mentioned before, like age or income, occupation, particularly if, maybe your whole objective is targeted at people who work in a certain area. So, I mean, in West Virginia, maybe it's coal miner safety, and certainly the occupation would be pretty narrow then, but then you would want to limit it to West Virginia coal miners or something like that. Psychographic variables. So this has to do with lifestyle variables. And again, a lot of you are going to find that depending on what you're doing for your campaign, it kind of is a campaign targeted at certain lifestyle choices. So maybe you're going to want to, for instance, if you're trying to reduce binge drinking, right, you're going to want to target binge drinkers. I know that kind of sounds obvious, but not really if you think about it, because sometimes you're not trying to target the people who are already engaging in a particular lifestyle. Sometimes you want to nip it in the bud and try to reach the people who haven't started yet, or things like that. But that's a great example, for instance, of how those could be two different audience segments that maybe you could address together, but maybe you just want to focus on one for one reason or another. And relatedly, they list a number of behavioral variables that you might want to consider. Things like readiness stage, and your book talks about a couple of theories or models that are commonly, and I mean commonly, used to assess how ready people are to adopt a particular behavior, or change a behavior, or even consider changing a behavior. And the reason that's important is because, if people, for instance, if you look at the stage of change model, people who are in a pre-contemplation stage means these are people who might need to start thinking about it or learning about a particular behavior before they adopt. They're not necessarily ready to quit smoking. Maybe they haven't even started to think about quitting smoking. And so there's an extra step that you would have to address in your campaign of actually having them start to think about it. Whereas people who have already contemplated it, right? Campaigns towards them might be a little bit different because they could already be on the fence. So all you need to do is develop something to push them over. That sounds kind of morbid, but right, not pushing people off bridges, but yeah, push them over the edge to the behavior that you want to see them do. Likewise, there are diffusion of innovations is another theory that talks about how people tend to adopt different types of innovations at different rates. Sometimes there are these, I consider my husband one, he's an early adopter of technology. So he likes to be the first person to get whatever new technology is coming out. So if there was an app, that helped him, I don't know, that helped him keep track of, well, actually, I mean, think about Fitbit, actually. If there was a technology that helped people keep track of their fitness and things like that, he was the first one to run out and buy it. And the honest truth is I don't even know if there needs to be a campaign, for instance, to try to convince people like my husband to go and get those types of technologies. Rather, you would want to start thinking about the people who might not see the value of having like a fitness tracker on their wrist. Or maybe they were using it, but they stopped using it for some reason. So again, these are all different types of things to consider, and you're just going to want to go through and think about as many potential audiences as you can, and you don't have to obviously use all of these different variables. It's really going to depend on your topic, but if you go down this and use it as sort of like a checklist to say, is gender, do I want to appeal to all genders, or is, for instance, ovarian cancer just something that I want to my campaign on ovarian cancer, is it just something that I want to have addressed to women, for instance, right? And I'm not saying it has to be like that, but anyway, hopefully that table and other things in your chapter will be really helpful at helping you brainstorm those things. And then once you've done that, the second step is, now that you have these different segments that you could potentially focus on, and I would try to come up with at least 3 different segments. You need to kind of do a cost-benefit analysis on and evaluate them to see which one is really the best one that you want to focus exclusively on. And see my notes here. Specifically, you're going to want to evaluate them based on a couple of criteria. First of all, how big are they, right? You can't address everyone. It's impractical fiscally, but also just theoretically when you're trying to develop messages or nudge people to a certain behavior to try to address very large audiences unless they're very homogeneous audiences, right? But that would be a specific segment. But you might also want to consider, for instance, how reachable they are. Maybe you know the perfect audience to reach, but maybe it's a stigmatized group. Maybe somebody, maybe you want to have a campaign targeted towards schizophrenics. But maybe schizophrenics, because mental illness is so stigmatized, they're reticent to identify themselves, so they might be a little bit harder to track down. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't do any sort of like social marketing targeted towards groups that might be harder to reach for whatever reason. It's just as a factor that you need to consider when you're weighing all your options. Also, we've already sort of talked about readiness, but it's something that you need to consider as far as how willing these target groups might be in terms of accepting the ideas that you're proposing. Again, even if you think that the people who are most opposed to something might be the ones that you want to target, it's still something that you're going to want to consider as far as, well, how feasible is my overall campaign objective going to be if I'm going to have, if I don't expect to persuade a lot of people because they're all sort of like hardcore opposed to whatever I'm proposing. So what is really nice is your book is set up, and I've sort of more or less copied a matrix that can be used to sort of compare the different groups that you've selected. So let's say you have 3, maybe 4 groups across different sets of criteria. And there are different ways of doing this. Let me just say that up front. But I'm asking you in your worksheet to do it one particular way where all of these different factors that you want to balance are weighted equally. So you're going to have to assess, for instance, and this can be based on some research that you've done, or sometimes it might be more anecdotal evidence that you can rely on to make these judgments. But let's just say that you are trying to figure out, for instance, we've talked before. Excuse me. We've talked before about maybe a social marketing campaign geared at showing people how to play sports safely so that they can reduce the number of concussions, okay? So you might determine, for instance, that, the group that this has the most impact towards are current players of different types of sports. So you might want to be targeting them, right? Because the impact is so high. So on a scale of 1 to 5, you would give them a 5 because the impact, right? Their contribution to the problem, so to speak, is very high. Or along that, if you're going to be ranking them on readiness, you could say, well, players specifically who have been playing for a long time might be less ready because they're already sort of set in their ways. Whereas new players might be a little bit more ready because they're more malleable and open to change in terms of certain procedures or using new equipment or whatever, again, the objective of your campaign is. The other criteria that you're going to have to think about is easiest to reach to. And this could be, I could understand, a little bit of a challenge because we haven't really gotten into the marketing strategy yet about how specifically you're going to place your messages and distribute your messages and things like that. But I am guessing that you guys have already started to develop a sense of how readily accessible the groups that you're most concerned about are. So, for instance, if you're targeting professional athletes, they might be not at all accessible. So you would rank them a 1 on a scale of 5. Whereas if you are targeting young athletes at schools where it might be very easy to just distribute some materials to a larger school system, you might rank them more like a 4 or 5 or something like that. So again, the point is different characteristics of your population can be ranked according to all of these different criteria. And then at the end, once you add up the score, so if got a 1 on readiness and a 3 on accessibility and a 4 on impact, you know, you'd compare that total score to how the other groups in your matrices scored. And that would help you assess, okay, the one with the higher scores, clearly the best audience to choose. Again, it's really, it is a workshopped sort of process. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to choose that audience. But I will say this, when you turn in your final proposal, I'm going to be looking for you to justify your decision. And that could be, by the way, in the form of saying, you know what, it was between this group and it was between this group. But in the end, it just seemed more practical to target this group because they seem to be contributing more to my wicked problem and they're easier to reach, or something like that. So that's the type of thing I'm going to be looking for. And again, you know, after you have your audience, I definitely wouldn't say the rest is downhill, but you already sort of know what your objective is. And then we had you choose your objective first, so that once you know what your objective is, you can say, okay, well, which audience is going to help me the best to reach this objective, or which is the audience that's most feasible to sort of reach out to regarding this this type of persuasion that I'm trying to go to. But once you have your audience, the rest of this, all of the marketing is about them. And the question you're constantly going to be asking yourself is, okay, well, how would this sit with my audience? Or how would my audience respond to this? Or if I'm telling my audience to do this, what sort of barriers? What are their unique life circumstances or, you know, demographics that either permit certain opportunities or barriers to the things that I'm proposing. I think that's one of the reasons I really like this is because, I mean, I remember in grad school, we were going to get t-shirts printed up that said, know your audience. All of communication studies to me is about really audience studies and thinking about who we're communicating to and, you know, really assessing how good we are at communicating with one group over another and tailoring messages to one group over another. And that's really an important skill to have. And obviously, it's crucially important to social marketing where really the success or failure of your campaign is going to hinge on one particular audience's acceptance or rejection of your message. That was unnecessarily vague. I'm sorry. I think that's really the most important things I wanted to highlight. I just want to make sure that you're, again, using your book as sort of a resource because it really does offer a lot of good suggestions and walks you through this process and helps you brainstorm. As always, though, if you run into any barriers while you're trying to work out the worksheet, just give me a heads up and email me just a couple days before it's due, hopefully, so I'll have some time to get back to you, and I'd be happy to help. The only other thing, no, you know what, forget it. I think we're good. I look forward to seeing all of your audience analyses and moving forward from there, so thank you very much. Oh, did you notice I'm in a new office? You want to see it? It's bigger. I don't know if I showed you like the other one, but I hope I don't unplug my computer when I'm doing this. I'm just going to give you a quick little tour. There it goes. Look at that. Look at that. Like 2 seats. Like if you ever visited my office, you could all sit there. That's candy in the corner there. I don't know if you can see. Look how huge it is. Yeah. So now I don't know if I'm ever even going to film at home anymore. Anyway. Okay. Sorry. Now you guys can go. I promise. But see you next time.